Good morning, Facebook world. Welcome to the 16th annual WUAA Symposium, virtual, coming to you from different places around the state. I'm in Green Bay. My name is Kevin Cullen, if you don't know me. I'm the president of WUAA, Wisconsin Underwater Archeological Association. We're going to go through a wonderful couple of hours together, but I want to turn it over to my co-host and former president of the organization, Brendan Baylott.
Thanks, Kevin. Morning, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here during these trying times in an online virtual symposium. Should be a great day. We've had some experience doing this sort of stuff online, and it's worked out pretty well. I just want to let everybody know, if it's your first time using this sort of format, you should be watching this right on the WUAA Facebook page. Now, WUAA also has a Facebook group. It's not there. That's our membership group. Our WUAA Facebook page is where you want to be. You don't need to go into the event. You just need to bring the page up, and you should see us right there on the page and hear us. If you have any problems or questions during the programs, you can email or you can message me on Facebook, or you can email me at brendan@baylod.com. I'd recommend you message me, and I'll try to talk you through getting in if you have any questions. Also, do be aware of our schedule. Kevin's going to walk through the schedule. The shows are going to start. Each show is going to be a separate thing, a separate window that's going to come up and be saved on our Facebook page. I want to let you know, too, every one of our presentations today is going to be uploaded to YouTube. I'll be uploading it to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group YouTube page, and we'll link to these videos from this page. So they'll be up there for posterity. So anybody who wants to come back and watch the presentations from David Cooper or Tamara Thompson or Ken Merriman can do so. And lastly, I want to remind everybody that our business meeting is going to be done on Zoom, so we can do the Brady Bunch squares. And that's a separate thing with a separate link that Kevin has posted. If anyone has any questions about how to get into the Zoom meeting, you can get in touch with me or Kevin, and we will walk you through how to do it. It's really just click the link and follow the prompts and get in. Is there a password, Kevin, on this one?
There should not be. No, it just did automatically let you in, so there won't be a waiting room either. But I'll be monitoring that in case somebody can't get in. But that'll start at 12:30. We'll go through the agenda here in a minute and kind of explain that. But we'll post that link too. It is in the Facebook page event for this symposium, so you can find it there in the agenda. Excellent.
So one other thing I wanted to tell everybody, if you've been to my show on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live, one of the things that we can do here in this format is we can take your questions live. So you'll have the ability to make comments, and we watch those, and we'll see those come across the screen live. Once the presentations are over, our presenters, or at the end of the presentations, our presenters will have a chance to respond to your questions. Feel free to type those in the comments section, and they can respond to them. We may not be able to get to all of them, and we may be selective about which questions we pick. So don't be offended if we don't get to yours. Sometimes we get a lot of questions. So that is all I've got. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and welcome. I hope you enjoy today's virtual symposium. Take it away, Kevin.
All right. I'm getting a post that some people are in the Zoom meeting. Hopefully that they will realize that this is going to be in Facebook currently. So the Zoom meeting is for after the symposium presentation portion. So if you are in the Zoom room, I guess I will try to join you in a minute here and face you back or point you back in the right direction. But I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of the agenda and a little bit about what to expect and who our presenters are for this morning. So here's my screen. So I'll let Brendan bring that up and share my screen. So here is the 16th annual WUAA Symposium virtual. This is a photograph, actually, I was just taken this last week. That's my son and myself measuring a piece of what turns out to be a historic pier structure. So I'll explain that a little bit more a little bit later. But here is the graphic that some of you have already probably seen. For those who are not familiar with the Wisconsin Underwater Archeological Association, we are a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 1990 by actually our first speaker, David Cooper, who I'll be introducing in a moment. But we are a group of volunteers. We have a board and we have membership throughout the state and even around the world. So the goal is for the preservation and education of Wisconsin's maritime heritage. So that's underwater, or it could be along the shorelines, or anything to do with the maritime landscape of the state of Wisconsin. Is something that we do and work with the state Wisconsin Historical Society's Maritime Archaeology and Preservation Program. There are websites. So if you've not been on our website, WUAA.org, WUAA.org, it is a great resource for everything that we're doing around the state, including publications that we are publishing. The most recent one is actually on the homepage there, Ghost Port Settlements and Shipwrecks in Door County's Clay Banks. So you can actually purchase this book and it'll be sent to your house. The main menu here, WUAA.org, you'll be able to click on those links. As you can see, you can learn about memberships, which we encourage everybody to do, to renew their membership. It's only $20 a year. It gives you great resources and also exclusive kind of events that you can be part of, or trainings and workshops that we're doing throughout the year. There's a lot of other things on here, including our online store. So you can buy, if you're interested in some of the merchandise that we have, including t-shirts and ball caps, among others, knit caps and things, they're on there, as well as our publications and books. Brendan's blog is actually even attached to this. So there's a number of things. One of the great resources too, if you're a member, is, and this is an exclusive thing for being a member, is that we have all of our newsletters archived as well in the publications tab. And our newsletters are a great resource for going back to 1990, and they're extremely well thought out and researched. And we are about to launch and publish our next one, which comes out probably actually at the end of today. So it's in the hopper, and some of the content we're covering today, including the story that we'll hear from Ken Merriman this afternoon or later this morning about the discovery of the Pier Marquette 18. That is included in there by Brendan Baylod, an article that he wrote. So here's the agenda for this morning. As you can see, we're at 10:10, so we're approaching this welcome and overview virtual presentations. But I'm going to very quickly now introduce our first speaker of the morning, and that is the esteemed David Cooper, who is going to talk about the founding of WUAA a little bit, but certainly what he's doing in the Apostle Islands up in Bayfield along the national shoreline for the National Park Service. So David Cooper, for those who don't know, here he is, a photo of him. David Cooper helped found the state of Wisconsin's Maritime Archaeology program in the late 1980s and served as Wisconsin State Underwater Archaeologist from 1988 to 1998. His archaeological fieldwork has taken him around the Great Lakes, Great Britain, and the U.S. East Coast, as well as the Caribbean. His academic training includes undergraduate work at UW-Madison and the University of Warwick in the UK, and graduated in his graduate work at East Carolina University. He has worked for 22 years for the National Park Service and has also worked for the U.S. Navy, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and ECU, East Carolina University. He now works as park archaeologist for the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore and lives in Bayfield, Wisconsin. So with that, we'll bring up Dave from Bayfield, Wisconsin.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me to participate. This is amazing to look back over 30 years back over WUAA and the state's maritime program. So it's an honor to be with you all today. It's kind of snowy and cold up here on Lake Superior. Kind of a little typical for this time of year, maybe a little early winter. But anyhow, this is where I work. The first slide, there's an aerial of the Apostle Islands. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of an overview, it's a archipelago of 22 islands, 21 of which are in the National Lakeshore. and about a 12-mile section of the mainland is also part of the park. It's best known for its scenery, including sandstone rock formations and caves, including our famous winter ice caves, and its collection of historic lighthouses. Next slide, please. I work for the Parks Resource Management Division, and a lot of people ask, what do resource managers do? And I guess the quick answer is a little bit of everything. We're responsible for studying, preserving, and managing a range of park natural and cultural resources, such as birds, plants, historic structures, wildlife, archaeological sites, geological resources, and landscapes. Although I'm classified as an archaeologist, my work is by necessity very interdisciplinary. My other specialty is boat instructing and boat operations. I also do marine search and rescue, wildland firefighting for the National Park Service, usually in partnership with the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Forest Service. So that's a little bit about me and what I do now for the National Park Service. But first we'll look back over some of the early years of the state program and the founding of WUAA. So next slide, please. I grew up in Door County, Wisconsin, up in Ellison Bay Hay, as they say. And this was sort of during the golden years of shipwreck diving in the early 1970s. The Alvin Clark had been discovered a few years previous off of Chambers Island. Many local shipwrecks were being discovered. And unfortunately, we were also beginning to discover the wrecks were degrading over time, parts of them disappearing, that sort of thing. So my interests led me to archaeology. Actually, both my parents had a strong interest in archaeology, and my dad actually volunteered at the Oriental Institute in Chicago as a guide. So he had a particular interest in Middle Eastern archaeology. So I first did medieval archaeology in England, and then went into a master's program in maritime archaeology in North Carolina, where I worked on Revolutionary War, Civil War, and Great Lakes shipwrecks, and eventually returned to Wisconsin in 1988 as its first state underwater archaeologist. A lot of people have asked where the program came from and its relationship with the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, which the Congress had just passed. The state legislature had a budding interest in shipwreck tourism and shipwreck preservation, and this was born out of interest in Michigan's tourism and its success with its underwater preserve system. The Wisconsin tourism folks were starting to look quite a bit at how Michigan was promoting itself in many different ways as the Great Lakes state. And two candidate areas had already made a NOAA list as potential national marine sanctuaries, and that would be Door County and Apostle Islands. This was a NOAA sanctuary candidate list that went back to the 1970s. So it was with the sponsorship of Door County Assemblyman Larry Swoboda that a pilot shipwreck survey program was begun in Wisconsin with a focus on Door County and, of course, Apostle Islands. And this was the beginning of the state efforts to inventory its historic shipwreck resources with an emphasis on its two marine sanctuary candidate areas. Having been a UW-Madison undergraduate, I naturally turned to my friends in the Wisconsin dive community, particularly in the Madison area where I was living, but also reaching out to some of the leaders in Wisconsin diving, such as Dr. Dick Boyd and Bob Korth. And after 2 seasons of recruiting and training volunteer divers to help with shipwreck survey, the idea of creating an underwater archaeology organization in Wisconsin took hold. And in 1990, WUAA was born. Tom Valand from Four Lakes Scuba was our first president and stood as president for many years. Dick and Bob served many years on the WUAA board, and Bob O'Donnell, Danny Arts, and Betsy True were among the early newsletter editors and artists. This was a time where a number of state shipwreck programs were developing, and in designing the Wisconsin program, I looked at examples of things happening in Michigan, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Vermont, and Maryland. Also the NPS Submerged Cultural Resource Unit. We borrowed and adapted ideas and worked to build WUAA as both an independent organization, but one which had a close working relationship with the state underwater program. WUAA was based strongly on shipwreck preservation and study using archaeological methods with an emphasis on hands-on work in wreck mapping. Next slide, please. I ran the state program from 1988 to 1998 with a one-year hiatus in 1993 when I was detailed to work in Washington with the U.S. Navy, and my assistant John Jensen took over the program for a year at that time. In this time, the foundation and the framework for the state program grew into the general form, which has characterized Wisconsin's state maritime archaeology program ever since. It developed a real emphasis on field surveys, usually in partnership with volunteers from WUAA, as well as field schools with East Carolina University. It began placing shipwrecks on the National Register of Historic Places. Wisconsin now leads the nation in this effort, I believe. It developed a technical report series disseminating the results of its field investigations. It partnered with UW Sea Grant and Wisconsin Coastal Management Program to obtain federal funds for its survey and outreach efforts. And it was the Sea Grant partnership that also provided boats, vehicles, and the internet savvy to design and develop Wisconsin Great Lakes Shipwrecks website. Other interpretive materials, such as the shipwreck cards, the waterproof slates, and the Wisconsin Maritime Trails wayside markers came later, as did efforts to integrate maritime heritage and shipwrecks into Wisconsin's fourth grade Wisconsin history curriculum materials. We partnered with Al Brown, a freelance underwater videographer, to gather broadcast quality digital video, both for field survey and for sharing with the news media. This was the forerunner to the stunning and beautiful underwater imagery now produced by Tamara Thompson for the state program. A lot of our diver education efforts included both our annual conference and then periodic training. Dick Boyd and I developed sort of a diver training roadshow that we would do in partnership with Greg Kent and Janet Defnett from Pearl Lake Dive School, and also worked with Craig Fink at Inland Seas Dive Academy and Manitowoc Maritime Museum. So we would have dive training going on around the state and even down in northern Illinois. And then every year we had some field opportunities, often in different corners of the state. Next slide, please. So this is our first WUAA newsletter. And a couple things to note about it. It sort of lays out what the vision for WUAA is as both a diver-based organization, but also a historic preservation organization. It calls the need for volunteers for helping with the shipwreck survey program. And our little regional news column was the beginning of efforts to try and have something going on in every corner of the state, whether it was a field event or training opportunities, or some sort of special program. And I think that was an important part of building WUAA as a statewide program and making sure that it didn't just become a Madison area organization. Let me see here. Next slide, please. The next newsletter highlights our first statewide meeting at UW Oshkosh, again trying to break out of the Madison-only mold, and also setting up board and bylaws. So this was the beginning of sort of formalizing WUAA as an organization. And you'll see the conference agenda for the spring meeting there, and also the names of some of the people I've mentioned already, Dick Boyd, Bob O'Donnell, and others who are involved in some of the earliest efforts at setting up WUAA and the dive training programs and that sort of thing. This was before Nautical Archaeological Society had really rolled out its international dive training. So we were sort of flying by the seat of our pants with this. I was working to sort of adapt knowledge that I'd had from my graduate training, but we were also sort of developing new things Bob O'Donnell and Craig Fink were working to develop a mock shipwreck in a local quarry that we could use for underwater training. We used the schooner cross-section, the big wooden schooner full-scale cross-section at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum for one of our shipwreck documentation classes to sort of teach shipwreck architecture and how to measure up shipwrecks. So those are some of the examples of ways that we had to adapt and improvise in those early years of WUAA. And I think it's just an amazing testament to WUAA and all of you who've been involved with it over the years, that WUAA is still around here 30 years later and thriving. And we're doing something we could have never imagined with this online conference. It's sort of quaint to look at some of these old newsletters and realize that some of these things are being developed when even email was not available yet. Internet was just becoming available. I remember sort of laughing when Sea Grant said we really should put some effort into developing a website. My impression of the internet at that point was it was mostly pictures of people's cats and beer ads. And I just didn't understand why we would want to have a presence in that area. That says something about my technical visionary, I guess. Not so great. Anyhow, another kind of cute thing, in order to get a map for the first WUAA meeting, you had to send a self-addressed stamped envelope to my office. So again, this is before email or being able to go into Google Maps. And I don't know why we wouldn't just send the map out in our own envelope. I must have been in some situation where I was real busy and just didn't even have time to fill out envelopes. But anyhow, some kind of interesting information to be gleaned from those early newsletters about sort of what we were dealing with as far as technological limitations that we now accept as just everyday life, emails and texting and internet. Next slide, please. So working the Apostles, I fell in love with Lake Superior, and I ended up switching jobs in 1998, moving to Grand Marais, Minnesota to work as archeologist and chief of resource management for Grand Portage National Monument, which is a unit of the National Park Service. On the left, that little dog, that's not my dog. It's he's got a little ranger uniform with a ranger badge and a little tag that says Cooper. So I thought that was cuter than a picture of me in ranger uniform. And on the right was one of the cartoons that one of the society staff did for my departure to Minnesota. That was sort of a tradition back in the day. When you left, you got a cartoon from our one of our staff artists. Jeff Gray very ably took over the reins of the state program and for a time served as president of WUAA. He later left to become superintendent to the new Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary in Michigan. And another longtime underwater program alum, Dr. John Jensen, departed for academia. He's now a professor at University of West Florida and author of a new Wisconsin Historical Society book on Wisconsin shipwrecks. And of course, a lot more talent was waiting in the wings with Russ and Kathy Green, Keith Meverden, Tamara Thompson, Caitlin Zant, who've all made their mark on the state program and have carried us through 3 decades. With involvement with WUAA as well. So next slide, please. So this is the beginning of my Park Service career. I greatly missed Wisconsin and my old friends at WUAA. I actually at one point was trying to lure Tom Valand and some of the WUAA folks up to Voyageurs National Park to do some underwater work on fur trade sites up there. We couldn't get the logistics sorted out. But I very thoroughly enjoyed my time in Minnesota. I worked up at Grand Portage for 12 years and took a very deep dive into the archaeology and the history of the fur trade. And interestingly, Grand Portage is one of the earliest locations for North American underwater archaeology, with the excavations at Fort Charlotte in the 1970s under the direction of Minnesota Historical Society archaeologist Douglas Burke. Doug and I later partnered on an archaeological survey of the 8.5-mile Grand Portage Trail. We became very close friends and colleagues. That was a real privilege of working up there. And as with WUAA, I again developed a program of avocational archaeology to support our field investigations. The upper slide is one of our field teams up at Fort Charlotte, French and British fur trade post on the Canadian border. The lower slide is part of the reconstructed fort at Grand Portage Bay, which I also had a responsibility for managing, including the educational programming there. Next slide, please. So, Apostle Islands. My Park Service career led me back to Apostles in 2010 as archeologist and cultural resource manager for Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. My biggest initial challenge was managing a multi-million-dollar rehab project on the park's historic light stations. We have 7 of them, a highly visible and highly complex public undertaking. I also developed a program of archaeological survey for the park islands, dealing with sites from 5,000-year-old archaic fishing camps to 20th century logging railroads. I also have responsibility for managing historic landscapes such as light station grounds and orchards, museum collections, and a range of other historic structures from Scandinavian immigrant farmsteads to early recreational cabins and resorts. Next slide, please. So all those years wearing rubber suits, I guess really got into my blood, and working at an island park brought many opportunities for what the federal government euphemistically calls collateral duties, including working as a Park Service boat operator and boat instructor, as well as marine search and rescue, ice rescue, and wildland firefighting, which I had started doing at Grand Portage. Over the past 10 years, I've devoted considerable time to building skills in these areas, working on numerous search and rescue incidents, working ice rescue, including at our famous ice caves, winter operation, operating park patrol boats, landing craft, and airboats in a wide variety of challenging conditions, day and night. Earned a U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes 50-ton master's license, and the park and the work on the big lake keeps me very, very busy, as you can imagine. So those are the slides I had, but we wanted to leave a whole lot of time. There's a bunch of old friends on the call, and a lot of questions, I'm sure, about how things rolled out the way they did, and maybe some of the choices that we made, the directions that we went. So I'd like to open it back to Brendan and Kevin to see what questions we're getting from WUAA.
If you can hear me, this is Kevin again.
Yep.
I was just curious about, of the shipwrecks that are located around the Apostle Islands, 6 of them, if I'm not mistaken, the Lucerne, Fedora, Ottawa, Savona, Pretoria, Knock Bay, among others, I think, Coffinberry. Do you think there are others? Could there be other wrecks that potentially located there, or you're looking for, or they're still unfound, I guess, or haven't been found yet?
Yeah, the state program has worked on several more recent deep water finds, and Tam can talk about those. A lot of those are off the east end of the archipelago, in a couple hundred feet of water. The Moonlight, the Antelope. There's definitely unfound wrecks in the area. The steamer Prussia, for example, off of Sand Island. Ken Merriman's team was doing wreck hunting up here back when I was working for the state. I had the privilege of working with him when they discovered the TH Camp, the boot company tug that had sunk off of Basswood Island. One interesting thing about our wrecks, the whole time we were doing the mapping, particularly of the shallow wrecks, we were really focused on diver tourism, of course. But we had a bit of a sense that there were other users as well. This is when sea kayaking was just getting popular, and now we've actually got a glass bottom boat that runs as part of the park's concession service, and a number of sea kayak outfits that actually do shipwreck tours and use those waterproof cards that we developed with Sea Grant. And we actually have a youth underwater photography program that also uses some of these wrecks. The image in the upper left is one of the kids' photos from, I think this is Coffinberry. So all kinds of things that we really couldn't imagine, but we sort of had a sense of hopefully these are going to be different public uses for the wrecks. And it's an example of how enriching even the shallow water wrecks can be for people who've never had any experience with a shipwreck before.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating work that you're doing there, and it's just so fascinating too, just hearing your stories about how the organization founded even before email was in common use. So we've come a long way, and that newsletter truly is kind of that lifeline that that connects us to that early history, and you can see that longevity and the thought and the research going into it. So being currently a member organization of NAS, the Nautical Archaeological Society. So we do have that international credentials, but just hearing the fact that, we as an organization kind of also were, essentially forming those similar trainings even before that international program began shows the caliber of the work that has been done here, and I guess the respect that we have for the maritime landscape and how we're connected to it. So kudos to you, and thank you again for sharing some of that insight and those names that are, I'm sure people are tuning in that, I know lots of people watching. So some of those, are probably some of the founders themselves that are going to be able to join us at the business meeting. We'll be able to see their faces too.
Kevin, I've got a quick question for Dave. One of the things that was always a back burner project for WUAA that we never really seemed to have gotten around to was to do sort of a Voices from the Rapids type of survey here in Wisconsin. If you're familiar with the Minnesota book that studied Voices from the Rapids, where they did sort of fur trade rivers and streams in Minnesota and surveyed, them by stretching out, you stretch a rope across above the rapids and then you put divers down into the rapids to see what's there. Was that ever something that was done in Wisconsin in your era? We talked about doing it on the Brewer River. And if not, do you think there's any value in doing something like that?
Yeah, the boundary water survey that you're talking about really included a very intensively used set of waterways and some sort of unique geology that contributed to a good state of preservation. A lot of the Wisconsin riverways have been much more intensively utilized, including having been dammed and used for log drives. So we often don't have quite the same state of preservation. But we did do some early underwater work. We worked with the Lac du Flambeau tribe, investigating several lakes that had potential inundated fur trade posts. We did remote sensing work off of the old British fur trade post at Madeline Island. And there was a number of other smaller fur trade investigations, including off of the Yellow River post in Burnett County and a few other areas. So I think there's definitely some potential for it, but that Voices project from Minnesota had some fairly exceptional resources that they were dealing with that we're not necessarily going to have that same quality of preservation here, but we've certainly taken a look at it, and there's certainly some potential.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid, just as an interest area, certainly, especially along the Fox River here, being in Green Bay and a very historic waterway, of course, and knowing the Portage areas, up the Fox River to, like Kaukauna, among others, there's very likely perhaps, something in those rocks. I know the archaeological sites on land in proximity to these portage areas are quite high, but I don't know if there's ever been a systematic survey of the rapids themselves to see what might be lodged, into those boulders.
The original vision was to do the Brule. It was seen as one of the few rivers in Wisconsin that hadn't been used for log drives. and had enough rapids of a certain class on it that it was felt it was likely that there were 2 or 3 rapids that would have something. It was a Dick Boyd idea originally, and something that we had all got pretty excited about on 20 years ago, and it never came to fruition.
Yeah, one of the issues, of course, is if you find stuff, we really didn't have a very robust conservation capacity for preserving artifacts. Minnesota had to sort of develop that capacity on the fly, and in fact, a lot of that material that they did recover, particularly the ferrous objects, ended up degrading pretty considerably. But at Fort Charlotte, for example, they had to develop their own conservation facilities to do that work. So it's definitely opening up a can of worms when you get into 200-year-old, 300-year-old iron objects that need conservation treatment.
For sure. We have a question from Scott Reimer, board member and also a member of the Chicago community of underwater archaeologists, Underwater Archaeology Society of Chicago. Scott asked, Dave, what are your current projects that you're working on?
So my current underwater project is working with Park Service dive team on monitoring of zebra mussels as they're beginning their invasion of the Apostles, which is including returning to a number of our old wreck surveys, including the Savona and the Ottawa, and that we may be potentially talking to WUAA or Great Lakes Shipwreck Preservation Society about perhaps some diver assistance in the future with monitoring on those locations. I also have terrestrial archaeological work going on a number of the islands, particularly Stockton Island, where we're surveying. Basically, it's a 5,000-year-old landform with archaic fishing camps on it. It's being surveyed as part of a project for reintroducing prescribed fire on the Tombolo, which had been a tribal practice that was used for managing blueberry harvesting. So we're also potentially going to be looking at the remains of historic native blueberry camps in that area as well. We also have work on historic logging camps that we're doing, basically mapping and condition monitoring. And of course, we always have work going on the light stations, including some limited archaeological work, but mostly building and landscape preservation work. So that's a lot of work summarized in a pretty small nutshell.
Yeah, no, it sounds like really, really important stuff. So I guess the question would also follow up to that is, how can WUAA members perhaps lend their knowledge or skills if there's a, let's say, volunteer quest?
Yeah, we're still figuring out how we would want to do this, but we may be looking at a volunteer effort for monitoring zebra mussels, particularly on Savona, which could include sort of mapping surveys or timed surveys and counts of mussels on the wreck, and also to the degree that we can, removal of mussels on the wreck. One limiter is, in order to dive off of park boats, you have to be part of the NPS dive program, which is a real problem for us because there's a lot of dive programs, even including the Bayfield Fire Department's dive team, that we'd like to be able to bring out, but it requires that they use their own boats and basically run their own dive operations if they're not part of the NPS dive program. So that would be a limiter. There's also the need for somebody to step forward and manage some of the mooring buoys on some of the local shipwrecks. The dive shop that had been doing that has decided that they really can't expend the effort on that any longer. But there again, it would mean people using their own boats and time to do that. So it's not an easy sell to get somebody to do that on their own. But those are examples of things that could be done. And then, of course, there's always the need for continued mapping and monitoring. We have a number of underwater sites that we haven't had time to get to that could use some documentation. So if someone is really seriously interested, has their own boat, and thinks they want to talk about some potential projects, send it my way this winter, and we'll see what we might come up with, even just as sort of a pilot study.
Very cool. Well, you heard it out there, Facebook land. If you need to get a hold of them, I'm sure your contact information is on the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore website, I assume, under nps.gov.
Yeah, and you could just send a message to the Apostle Islands webmaster. The park acronym is APIS, so it would be the APIS webmaster. There's a contact us link on the park website, and then it'll get to me that way.
Very cool.
So,
Well, I know it's a very special place up there, and we're glad to have you back in the state. And I was fortunate to also have a chance to do some terrestrial archaeology back in the day when I was working with the Historical Society on Madeline Island. So at the fur trade site that's down there. So it's just an incredible amount of history, and very sacred to, of course, the First Nations people that are from that region. So it looks like it's in good stewardship. I'm hearing a ring. All right. So are you still there, Dave?
I am. I'll stand by here, and then when the next speaker comes on, I'll check out and then come back in via Facebook. But if you need me back, send me a text.
Will do. Well, again, it's been an honor to have you join us this morning and to share the origins of this organization and to see the torch carried forward in the next few years. So, although I'm still president this year, next year we are going to be voting in a new slate of officers. So, if you'd like to get back on the board there, Dave, we'll certainly put you up for nomination. I'm going to try to pass the torch, being it'll be 10 years for me as president. So I feel like we'll continue to keep the organization afloat as we go into the next decade ahead of us. So yeah, I think I guess we got so far. I don't know, Brendan, if you're still there, we can bring up the other screens, or at least see us, and we can say adios to Dave for the moment. There.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, thanks again, Dave. There he is. So
and hopefully it won't be another 20 years before we talk again.
Yeah, let's hope not. But definitely good to know. Keep in mind about your offer of potential resources for people out there that may have a boat and can help with the work that you're doing, the important work up in the Apostle Islands. So
sounds good.
Takers.
Just a housekeeping note then, guys. We are going to stop the video now, and at 10:50, when Tammy comes on, we will start a new session. It'll show up in a new window just on the WUAA Facebook page. So stay on the WUAA Facebook page, and a new live broadcast will start at 10:50.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks again, Dave. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Hold on.
Stopping.
Take care.
Stop.